What's your message for them?
Well, if I didn't align myself with both of them, you'd never have a deal. You want me to say really terrible things about Putin and then say, "Hi, Vladimir, how are we doing on the deal?" That doesn't work that way. I'm not aligned with Putin. I'm not aligned with anybody. I'm aligned with the United States of America. And I'm aligned with Europe. I want to see if we can get this thing done. The one thing you never want to happen is you never want Russia and China uniting. We united them. It's a shame. The stupidity of what they've done. Well, I'm going to have to ununite them, and I think I can do that too. I have to ununite them.
Identifying the extraordinary opportunities that exist should this conflict come to a acceptable end, the credible opportunities that exist to partner with the Russians geopolitically on issues of common interest, and frankly economically on issues that hopefully will be good for the world and will also improve our relations in the long term between these two important countries. This is the single greatest challenge this nation has ever faced. We have never faced a near-peer adversary that poses such a comprehensive challenge the way that China does today.
I openly warned the American people that from my unique vantage point as an official who saw more intelligence than anyone else, I assessed that China was far and away our top national security threat.
We also face a peer competitor in the communist Chinese with the capability and intent to threaten our homeland and core national interests in the Indo-Pacific. The U.S. is prioritizing deterring war with China in the Pacific, recognizing the reality of scarcity and making the resourcing trade-offs to ensure deterrence does not fail. As the United States prioritizes its attention to these threats, European allies must lead from the front. Together, we can establish a division of labor that maximizes our comparative advantages in Europe and Pacific, respectively. We ask each of your countries to step up on fulfilling the commitments that you have made. And we challenge your countries and your citizens to double down and recommit yourselves not only to Ukraine's immediate security needs, but to Europe's long-term defense and deterrence goals. Safeguarding European security must be an imperative for European members of NATO. As part of this, Europe must provide the overwhelming share of future lethal and non-lethal aid to Ukraine. Members of this contact group must meet the moment. This means donating more ammunition and equipment, leveraging comparative advantages, expanding your defense industrial base.
I can announce that a new 3.5 billion euro payment for Ukraine will arrive already in March. Second, as President Costa just has announced, there will be a special European Council, and I will present at this special European Council a comprehensive plan for defense investment, for scaling up our European arms production and defense capabilities, but also for investment in Ukraine's defense industry, scaling up your arms production, your defense capabilities. So this will be a plan for the European Union and for Ukraine.
Let me just make a point about allies and partners. I think the last two administrations both have strengthened the relationships we've had facing these threats that are so real to us. NATO has obviously been strengthened. You can make the case that Putin may have more to do that than anybody else, but both administrations played a role in doing it.
China has the largest Navy in the world by numbers. I would argue their ships are much, much more impressive today than they were a decade ago. Also, if you look at their total production capacity, they can build 232 ships for every one ship that we build. If you take all of our shipyards, put them together on a geographic footprint, they would not fill the geographic footprint of the largest of the 13 Chinese shipyards. If you look at where they are today, they're on track to have 1,500 nuclear warheads by 2035, with no nuclear arms limitation treaty in sight. I want to look at what can we do in the short term to be that deterrent force. How can we take what is an asymmetric advantage with us being the best creators and innovators on the earth, with us building expendable and attritable systems at the same pace that we see happening elsewhere in places like Ukraine. How do we close that gap?
All the elements of national power have got to come into play here. And obviously, we're competing with them economically, diplomatically, technologically, militarily, and geopolitically. We are making good progress, I believe, geopolitically with our allies and partners in the region. But there's more that we can do there. Technologically, I believe certainly that our democratic capitalism can beat their state capitalism.
How do we drive a wedge? How do we keep this convergence or this excess of aggression from forming even stronger? So if we go back 5 years, it was very different. How do we drive that wedge from it continuing to progress the way it is? Why don't we start with you, Dr. Carlin?
We look at how to drive a wedge and see these limits. Who's dying right now for Russia? As far as I can tell, it is only some North Koreans. I don't see Chinese or Iranians dying for them. That's actually very different than the United States. We have tens and tens of allies who, throughout history, but especially in the post-9/11 wars, have been willing to do so.
What makes America a good country is America engaging in diplomacy. That's what President Trump is doing.
Can I ask you?
Sure.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
See, I think it's good for the American people to see what's going on
I
over
understand,
there.
sir.
I think it's very important. That's why I kept this going so long. This is going to be great television, I will say that.
Welcome to What's Left, a weekly political discussion challenging the mainstream left. I'm Eduardo Barca from Mexico City with co-host teacher and socialist Andy Lipson from Oakland, California. We're online at Whatsleftpodcast.com. You can find that link to our site in the episode notes, wherever you found this episode. You can also find my personal social media handle as @DonEduardoBarca, and I have it here as my name on this virtual call if you'd like to see it. Please subscribe, rate, review, turn on your notifications, and share your favorite episode wherever you found this episode. We have merch as well. If you fancy a shirt, contact us through our site, and Andy will respond on whatsleftpodcast.com. Thank you. Thank you for redoing this, since we are going to... What happened, Andy?
Well, on Thursday, today is Saturday, and 2 days ago, we recorded an episode about Ukraine. Well, you and I talked about Ukraine on what should have been an episode of What's Left. But for the second time in our history, I forgot to press the record button. And you were pretty upset. I was irritated, but I took it actually relatively well. And then we weren't sure if we were going to wait till next Thursday. And then and then this whole craziness with Trump and Zelensky and J.D. Vance of the White House happened on Friday. And then Brandy said to me, she goes, maybe it was a good thing you guys didn't record your episode, because that would be a good thing to be able to discuss. And at first I was a little irritated, or at first I was hard, yeah, kind of, because it's a blow in the soul when that happens, right? When you talk and the whole thing's not recorded, and you feel like, how are we going to talk about all this again? But I actually think a good thing happened, even though I don't want it to happen again. So I'm just recording from the ground, from the jump now. But yeah, this is round 2 for us. But it feels different, to be honest. It feels different for me.
Well, let's jump right into it then. Yeah.
Yeah.
Ukraine, Russia, Trump. What's happening?
Well, let me ask you this. I want to start with you. What did you make of when we talked on Thursday? What were the big takeaways you took from some of the things you heard me say? Because as we knew, this was an episode that I had asked for, this is the thing I've been paying attention to. Our Ukraine episodes are generally almost like an interview of me, because this is not something that you're kind of into as much. So I'm curious, what were your big takeaways from our Thursday discussion?
Number 1 is the division of Russia and China. that Europe will take care of Russia and the US will take care of the Indo-Pacific area. And that is what I think will happen. And it's trying to keep NATO doing that work instead of USA pouring its resources into NATO, that they can focus on that area of the specific region, the geographical region of the world. That's number one.
Can I speak to that number one, and then you go to number
Yeah.
two? Okay. Yes, and that we're far from Trump being a peace candidate and actually bringing down the prospects for World War III. What we are seeing is the war expand. Again, the global war expand. And why? Because what the U.S. is trying to do, and some of those clips speak to it, and Pete Hegseth, who is Trump's Department of Defense not appointment. He's the guy now, and it's been Congress has agreed with that. He literally lays it out. He wants NATO to double, even more than double, its military spending, and take up the cause of helping Ukraine fight Russia. In Hegseth's speech, which you didn't really hear then, he agrees with Europe that the greatest threat to Europe is Russia. But that Europe needs to be the one that takes that defense up because, as you saw there on that clip, the United States cannot fight 3 wars at a time. It's going to try to go and fight. It is best situated to fight in the Pacific, and that's what it intends to do, and that means taking on China. It will do what it can to assist Israel in taking down Iran, because they're carrying on in that. We can see that. But the lifting of continuing to try to bleed Russia has to be done by Europe and continued by Ukraine. They want Ukraine to continue this war. And when I say they, I mean the United States. They just want the United States just wants to pull its tent stakes out because it cannot physically do that. And I believe they're trying to do this in a way in which it's not so obvious that the US has been defeated in the European theater. And so they want, if it's going to be a defeat, they want Europe to face that defeat, not the United States, and for not to lose its status globally as a result. So that's the only thing I would add about that. And yes, you mentioned the notion of splitting China from Russia. Trump's attempt to woo Russia is and to say that they're abandoning Europe and that they're abandoning even Ukraine is a political attempt to tell Russia, we're ready to make a deal with you. We're ready to even lose historical allies to do so. Their only reason for doing that is, number one, they've lost already in the European theater, and two, they want to create a division between Russia and China politically. And last thing I'll just say is all this notion that the U.S. and Europe are separating, and I would even say that the U.S. and Ukraine are separating and getting mad at each other. I think that's all theater. It's all fiction. If Europe is now going on to war footing, just like the U.S. wants it to, if Europe was truly in opposition to the United States, they would not do that. They would actually say, no, we're not going to just take this thing up. We don't have a stake in this. We don't have an interest in this, because this was a U.S. war. This war was started by the United States by arming a proxy back in 2014, by starting a coup in 2014 Ukraine, and by arming that proxy. Obama armed them. Trump armed them, as he talked about in this thing with Zelensky about giving them javelins. And then Biden armed them, and they were preparing to try to use military and economic means to weaken Russia. It failed, and now the United States finds itself caught in the Ukraine trap, and it's trying to extricate it with as few political costs to them as possible, even though militarily, and I would say geopolitically particularly, they have been weakened by this, and Russia and China have been strengthened. So those are some things I want to add based on, but yeah, those are some of the things I remember saying. So if you think there's a point 2, definitely go to point 2.
I forgot point 2, but I was looking over my notes. I'm thinking, Andy, you see Zelensky and you see what's happening on Friday, a lot of people would think a lot of reactions around the world and government officials saw it otherwise. They don't. They see this as an abandonment of Ukraine because Trump wanted to sign the deal, so to speak, and get his minerals. And he's a businessman, and he's not focusing on the independence of Ukraine as it is portrayed in the media that this is happening. And you have, I think it's a prime minister, I forget, president or prime minister Sanchez from Spain saying, "I'm with Ukraine," English, Spanish, and also in Ukrainian. You have Macron saying he's with Ukraine. You have all the people, the big leaders in NATO, such as uh, German officials. You have French and you have British, all saying they're with Ukraine. It 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 seems from the outset that it is just Trump being Trump and trying to make a business deal, and it's not necessarily, um, how do I put it? It's an abandonment. It doesn't look like political theater to some people.
Right. Well, first off, Zelensky was an actor. Trump was an actor. Politicians are actors. And the thing to remember about this is actually in terms of the European ruling class trying to get its population to accept austerity as they arm themselves up. Okay, that's their goal. In terms of Zelensky saying to his people, "I'm your war president. I'm fighting for you. I'm fighting for Ukraine, and I'm fighting against Russia, and I'm willing to oppose a US president to do so." I think his status has been raised as a result of this. And over here with Trump, I'm the president trying to fight for peace. Europe, Zelensky doesn't want peace. Europe has been unwilling to take up its own defense, which they're the ones. This is their war, not the United States' war. And we certainly can't, deal with Zelensky because he's unreasonable. He doesn't understand that his country is dying. We're not going to talk to him about this. We're just going to talk to Russia. And we're going to. The other thing that's important is for the United States to say, the last administration threw a ton of money at this, and we lost a bunch of money, and it took money from taxpayers. We are going to bring money back home with this. We are going to find a way of making this good for the United States financially. What I would say is, as a result of this event, and let's remember, Emmanuel Macron went down and visited, and there was a little whatever happened there. Starmer went down and visited, and right after that, Zelensky. To me, all of this whole thing sets up all the leaders perfectly for doing what they need to do. It sets up the Zelensky to go back and be the war president, to go back and double down with his own population, to say, yeah, Trump is abandoning us. We thought the United States was with us, but Trump is abandoning us. Europe is prepared to be with us. They're going to come along, and they're putting money on the table and putting weapons into our hands. And I'm willing to fight against this awful Russia. And I'm asking you, not just as 25-year-olds and 26-year-olds, to come and get involved in this war effort, but I'm saying we're going to have to get 18-year-olds on this war effort. Zelensky has been rebranded as a hero fighting for the Ukrainian people because he was willing to take on the big U.S. bully. That's what I believe that has happened now. That's how the Europe is talking about it. That's how even some people in the U.S. press are talking about it. Like, this is a guy who's willing to stand up for his country and against Donald Trump. In Europe, what do you get out as a result of this whole theater of a so-called U.S. split and a so-called situation where J.D. Vance comes down in Munich at the Munich Accords and basically scolds Europe for being non-free speech and reaches out to the more conservative and right-wing elements of the European working class. What do you get? You get right-wing or conservative workers in Europe basically saying, yeah, they're our guy. We should take up our own defense. We should be the ones. Europe has to do that. Basically mouthing what Trump wants from them in the first place. And then on the left, you have them oh, Trump's horrible. He's abandoning Europe. We don't want to pay for defense. We'd rather pay for social services. But you know what? US is leaving. We have no choice. So basically, Trump has given the European ruling class, with the way he's played this, the perfect pitch to get their people to accept more austerity in the name of building up their war efforts. And this is why I say it's an expansion of World War III, because now you have now gotten powers from Europe to essentially agree to the goal of doubling their war efforts with the aim of fighting Russia, and fighting Russia first through Ukraine, because even now they're saying they want Ukrainian blood to be spilt instead of European, but preparing the European people for spilling blood. And of course, last you have Trump here, who seems to be flipping the script, right? Oh, it was Biden who was saying we'll go to this till the end. Everyone thought that it was Biden's war that was about supporting this proxy till the end. Now everyone's thinking, oh, he's doing the opposite. He's breaking away. He's scolding that proxy. He's basically telling that person, I want nothing to do with you. But he's doing so, number one, at best, to fight a war more aggressively in another theater, and really also to basically put the blame of being involved in Ukraine on Zelensky, as opposed to the fact that Zelensky's been a puppet the whole time. So it's perfect for the US ruling class to be able to play this little game. And so I find those events that took place there believable only in the aspect of, I do believe that these people put forward a theater for us to try to fool the people of Europe, to try to fool the people of Ukraine, to try to fool the people of the United States, possibly to try to fool Russia into believing that the US is legit on this. I can't believe Russia will go for it. I will say Russia's certainly smarter than me on looking at this. So, but to me, everyone, Zelensky, the European ruling class, and the American ruling class, all benefit out of these events that just took place in terms of their aim to spread the war, to build the global war, and get their populations to double down on it. That's what I see.
Well, that brings us into, I think, what your analysis is on what's happening. Because if Russia's not being fooled into this, then I don't think there would be a division of China and Russia.
Right. Right.
So what do you predict will happen then? And I don't know, from here until within the next 10 years.
Well, the first thing to remember, I mean, again, I look at it through the lens of capitalism. The United States, the US capitalists aren't dedicated. If you can say they're dedicated to anything, they're dedicated to themselves. And that's true with the European capitalists. That's true with the Russian capitalists. That's true with the Chinese capitalists. So Russia and China's alliance, and the US knows this because they know all these alliances are built on paper and can melt away if the circumstances change. Russia and China aren't really friends. They're allies because they face a common enemy. To whatever extent they believe they can get Russia to believe that they can exploit an opening here to build a wedge between the United States and Europe in making an agreement with the United States, then they are already, in getting Russia to even think of that, they are already getting Russia to already move in their sphere. Because you have to remember, it's not like friendships, like you and me being friends. All of these people actually really hate each other because they all know at the end of the day, they are the ones who want to rule the globe. All these sectors hate each other because they all know they're in competition with one another at the end of the day. So the United States knows to any extent that they can draw Russia into believing that they can get something by beginning to craft deals with the United States. By definition, they are moving them into their sphere. because they don't have to get Russia to believe that the United States is their friend, because they already know that that's not they know that the other side knows that's not the case. But Russia also is not friends with China. That's just an association built because they think there's nothing to be gained from dealing with the United States. The United States is trying to change their mind, trying to say, look, there's something you can gain from us. We all know at the end of the day, and here's the truth. The United States knows that Russia knows that if US goes down and China is left with Russia, China's taken Russia out. That's the reality. And they all know that. That's how this game works. So everyone has got a knife behind their back as they show up at the gambling table. The US is trying to basically say to Russia, look, we don't like you, we don't like China, we don't like Europe, we don't like Ukraine. We've had to play some ugly games here that took that, and it has a body count for Ukraine, and yes, it had a body count for your people, but you don't give a shit about your people any more than we give a shit about ours. So how can they make Russia begin to believe there's something to be gained by talking to them and maybe making an agreement with them that each of them thinks, oh, I'll break somewhere down the line. And that's the game that's being played. And so I believe the United States is trying to do something to make that association weaker in real time, so they can have so when they move on China, they may feel they have a way to keep Russia out or down, or actually have Europe build its military up to the point where Europe can actually extend Russia to the point where Russia cannot help China. And so Europe is keeping Russia pinned down. We saw that recently. Syria was a proxy of Russia, and Russia had kept it up. But because Russia was so extended in Ukraine, they could not prop up their puppet any longer. And the US was able to take Syria out. And now Israel moved in, as well as other powers in Turkey and parts of Jordan, and even the United States holding up some territory in northern Syria. So this is the game they're playing, which is a game biding for time. I believe so. I think some people think that Zelensky is now a president who's now more at risk. I believe the opposite. I believe he has now been rebranded and re-energized to be the person to lead the Ukrainian cause, with Europe right behind them. And you saw, like, there was a whole chorus of European leaders who came out and said, we support Zelensky and stuff like that. Exactly what you would expect the Europeans to do. And it's exactly in line with what the United States would want them to do, so that now Europe can take responsibility for that. So again, everyone in this little game that they just played benefits from this game. And that's, for me, that's why I believe it's staged.
And this isn't a peace deal, as we had discussed on Thursday, as some would be led to believe that this is a peace deal, and that's what Trump is trying to do, trying to prevent World War III, as he even said it in the Oval Office.
But on any real term, the way you and I have been speaking about Ukraine, when Russia first invaded Ukraine, Jessica said, I guess this is World War III. And I was like, what, really? And we have seen the war expand, not just on the Ukraine-Russia front or the NATO-US-Russia front, but expand into the Middle East and have echoes into Africa. And now I think the United States plans on bringing it more decisively into the Pacific, while maintaining and even expanding that war on the European front, because Europe is going to double its arms spending. So how anyone could see the European ruling class double its arms spending while the United States says, we'll take care of business over here as a peace agreement, that's just foolishness, because they're literally doing the opposite. It really is, if you look at it, it's an extension, and it's in a growing, we are seeing a war, more people grow into this war as opposed to people coming out of the war. And I mean global World War III.
Yeah. I mentioned in the last conversation we had about how Trump was pushing for more spending from NATO spending and more European responsibility over there. So that does align with what you're saying about leaving that area region and having it be taken care of by Europe. In what's next, I guess, for China? I think, are we moving into Taiwan?
That's Taiwan or the Philippines. That's what I mean, here's the way they've been talking about dealing with this.
What's the start of the conflict?
Yeah, like basically, I mean, in one of the State Department documents, they have physically removed out the notion that accepting the idea that there is one China and that China is China. Like they no longer, in one of the government documents that where they used to say that Taiwan was a part of China, they no longer say that. The U.S. is certainly keeping its options open for supporting another proxy, starting another proxy conflict. And I think the Philippines has been another region that has been talked about as a region that the U.S. could draw China in and then fight them from there. But I think by and large, from what I've heard, the plan is to largely operate as the U.S. as pirates of the seas, and basically interdict, possibly sink Chinese vessels that are trying to do trade or whatever else around the globe. So I think if the U.S. was trying to fight China, it may take the form of a blockade before it takes the form of U.S. putting its ships right into the region. One of the clips that I didn't include in the opening clips that was in the House Armed Services Committee discussion was that guy, General Keane, basically saying, look, if we put any of our ships near China, our entire fleet will be sunk, pretty immediately. So the U.S. knows that it can't do that because of hypersonic missiles. So I think the advantage they have is they don't have a larger fleet, but they do have a larger ports all over the globe from which they can send their fleets. And so they can interdict Chinese ships much more easily all across the globe than China can do the same to the United States. And so I believe in the coming years, there's going to be some basis for U.S. saying we're shutting China down. They're going to have some reason, false flag or what, for fighting China in a war largely that will start in the same way that U.S. started its war on Japan in World War II, with a blockade. And that's what I believe is a more likely strategy, particularly in light of the fact that this last proxy attempt to bleed Russia, which has ultimately bled the West more and raised the profile of Russia geopolitically instead of destroying them economically and militarily. I think there's not quite an appetite for the United States to try another proxy war on Taiwan, which is a much tougher fight for the United States to operate as a proxy. I think Taiwan is way closer to Russia than and you don't even have any border countries from which you can arm Taiwan, in which that's what they've been doing with Ukraine. So I think more likely than not, I don't think we're going to see another proxy war. I think we're going to see something in which the U.S. talks about its outrage at something China has done. I think possibly a false flag. And then I think we're going to see a blockade of China with the U.S. Navy.
So you don't think there are going to be negotiations, not to halt World War III, but rather to pause war?
Yeah, the negotiations have never been about halting World War III. The negotiations and I think you're talking about the ones between the United States and Russia, right? The negotiations goal is to draw Russia into the U.S. sphere of influence in some way, shape, or form. That's all that is. And if you do that by almost automatically, you are creating fissures and rifts in the relationship with Russia and China, because now China has to wonder what's happening in those discussions, and because China knows they're being they're not being fully truthful with Russia. Russia's not being fully truthful with them. Everyone's holding some, like I said, a knife behind their back and some cards. So this is what the goal of that is. The U.S., it's being clear, is trying to expand the global war by getting more participants around the globe to arm themselves in the aim of fighting a war. And no, so this World War III is, they can say, U.S. can say that this is about stopping World War III, but that's a lie. And Trump even accused Zelensky in that press conference of, you're willing to go to World War III. Again, a lie. This has always been the United States war. They have used Ukraine and Zelensky as a puppet. And so the puppets don't get to make the call. Puppets are puppets. And he's been a puppet the whole time. So the risk of World War III, the power that was willing to risk World War III has always been the United States. They just thought they could win, and they were wrong.
The whole reason why people voted for Trump is not the whole reason, excuse me. One of the main reasons was for people like my friend Jake, that he just wants to be out of wars, and that Trump was promoting that. He was the president of peace. So back to the US and the people who see Trump as a leader, I guess what would you say to them? You know, falling for that trap?
Well, first off, this trap was laid pretty early, right? And a big reason people are still just believing Trump is because they thought the state was trying to kill him. They thought the CIA, they thought the establishment didn't want this guy. Again, I'm saying that thing was set up to make you believe that. Not you, Eduardo, because I don't know if, but to make people believe that. So Trump is still benefiting from what I think is a lie before. And then, since then, they were like, oh, he might be killed here. He might be killed here. Like, he might not make it through the inauguration. And really all we've seen throughout this whole event is like everything moving towards Trump. In fact, I don't know if you know this, but literally the very day when Zelensky offended Donald Trump, right, in the Oval Office, do you know that Lindsey Graham has come out and basically said, I can't believe Zelensky did that. Zelensky is so bad. I'm dead to, he's dead to me, essentially, you know? Do you know what that, like, do you know how significant that is? Lindsey Graham has been the biggest war hawk, Zelensky hawk, for all these years, right? Oh, Zelensky's my buddy. Oh, the Ukrainians are the greatest. They'll bleed for us without us having to bleed. And you're telling me that literally on the very day that this little tiff happens, Lindsey Graham's going to come out and say, oh my God, I'm outraged at Zelensky. And, you know, until he changes, we shouldn't be talking to that man. Like, that, to me, that says that the U.S. ruling class understands what the script is. They understand they're all going to turn to it. And Lindsey Graham is just right along with it. If there was anything really real here, Lindsey Graham would have certainly waited a day or two or three while he talked to Zelensky, talked to whatever, to find out what the fuck. But no, everyone knew it. It seems to me everyone knew their marching orders. So that's another thing I wanted to say about that. The things people have to do is actually ask themselves, are you going to evaluate these politicians on what they say or on what they do? And if you just are going to evaluate the politicians on what they say, then go ahead, believe what they tell you. But I think there is a 2-century history that we can fall back on to know that politicians are straight up liars and their words are completely not, reliable, and that their deeds you will better know them by their deeds. And I would ask your friend Jake and anybody who was thinking Trump is a peace candidate, in what way is the world more at peace if the U.S. is successful at extricating itself from Ukraine, at getting Europe to take up the fight in Ukraine, and furthermore, in emboldening the Ukrainians with their new president who is willing to be seen as being tough enough to take on Trump, basically a new wartime president who's recommitting himself. to fighting for Ukraine getting its territory back instead of the negotiations in which they won't. That, like, to me, and of course, the United States talking about it's going to fight a war in a different theater. To me, that is manifestly not a peace position, but an expansion of the war. I don't know what to tell you, basically, if you want to call that peace.
Wow. I mean, I think it's sometimes natural, right? You see something as you're a spectator watching this, and you're thinking, my goodness, either you're thinking Zelensky is unlike other political leaders, able to confront Trump and even speak over him. Others are thinking he's putting his the U.S. American interest at first hand and prioritizing it.
Yeah.
You know, but there is a whole other thing going on when it comes to reality as it reflects or it's manifested in real time.
Yeah, and one thing I'll say is a lot of how I really ultimately evaluate, because I do think there's going to be some sort of negotiation between Russia and the United States. I do believe that, and maybe some version of drawing Ukraine into it, some version of drawing Europe into it, maybe. The degree to which Russia plays hardball with the United States and the West versus tries to find some accommodation and give itself in a way give itself own time will to me reveal how right I am or how wrong I am about believing that Russia really holds most of the cards right now in that theater, and really has the United States over a barrel. And if that's the case, I believe Russia can make it almost impossible for the United States to pull its hand out of the cookie jar and continue to pummel the West and pummel the United States and draw them down as China fights on another front. Not fights on another, well, fights on another front as China pushes its interests on another front. And again, China and Russia acting at this point together. But if it turns out Russia is really looking to get out of this war and recognize that maybe they survived the sanctions, they're militarily stronger now than they were before the war started. But if they feel like their situation is precarious, then they will look for it to get a deal from the United States. So a lot of this also depends on something that I think has been very hard to assess in anywhere from the way the United States saying Russia's been slaughtered, Russia's defeated, all hail Ukraine, to people who are saying the United States is defeated, Ukraine is defeated, all hail Russia. And I don't hail Russia, but I have been more on the side of people who assess that geopolitically Russia is on a much stronger position there and as a result in the globe because of these events. I think a lot will be revealed in terms of what is actually negotiated, and that's, I believe, how we will see what's real and what's not real about this. I continue to believe, and this is something I hear from the think tanks still, that there will be no agreement reached between Russia and China, and as you saw that when Rubio said a mutually acceptable agreement to be reached. That's what they're trying to get. Because I believe Russia's won, they don't have to get a mutually acceptable. They can put terms to the loser. If Russia does not do that, then that means even Russia does not believe they've fully won this war, and they're looking for a way out as well, which is what Trump is saying. And I question that, but I think we'll find out in some ways by what type of agreement gets reached through these negotiations.
I mean, you don't have a conventional way of seeing this, and I appreciate this point of view because it does give me reasons to reassess everything I watch or listen to. And it does make sense to pay attention and to see things. And as you outline, which I hope you will share, the clips you have shared, the intentions of Trump, which is to divide China and Russia, the intentions of scolding the Europe and to have more spending and take care of NATO and its allies to pour themselves into that conflict of the world, in that part of the world, so they can focus on American interests, but rather to take care of this side of the geographical part of the world. It does make sense, you know.
So
Time will just tell.
time will tell. But at the end of the day, it is not good in the United States that the left is not anti-war, because by and large it wants the United States to support Ukraine. And that libertarian and conservative section of the working class, which had said it wanted peace and to get out of Ukraine, has been fooled into supporting a war president and thinks it's a peace president. That is not a good thing. As well as celebrating a president for saying he's going to extract minerals out of a country that the United States has already used as its meat shield against Russia. Like, that is a real bad thing when people are like, yeah, he's gonna get their stuff. You know, it's like, I mean, that is the worst of the worst in terms of what empires do. And you can't be a working class celebrating that and think that you're fighting your own ruling class.
I guess the other question would be then, what do we have to do as a working class?
I think we have to always call out our own rulers as liars, as violent, and as possibly the author of much of the violence on the globe, and say that to fellow workers that our enemy isn't Zelensky, our enemy is not the European ruling class, the Russian ruling class, the Chinese ruling class. Our enemy is here at home. And it's the same ruling class that you were pissed about under Biden. You just got a new little shingle above there, but essentially it's the same group. And your enemy is here at home. It's them that needs to be taken down, and we need to do a genuine January 6th, not the fake one that the FBI used to fucking build itself. We're far away from that, but that will have to be like what happens is like people are going to have to rise up and take on their own governments, take down their own governments, if we are going to avoid what seems to be the inevitable building of a growing global war, because that's what's happening here. What's happening is we are what people are celebrating when they celebrate Trump's plan is they are celebrating a whole section of Europe doubling its war spending and those European capitalists are trying to convince their own population to go to conscription, right? To go to like everyone gets in the army now, things like that. That was something Britain was talking about. Being mandatorily coming into the army. And that's what the Europeans talking about, because they know they don't have as many soldiers as they need. So that is the United States trying to get Europe on war footing, and Europe saying, yeah, we're ready. If you think that's peace, I don't know what to tell you.
It's not going to come from its leaders, the leaders.
No. And another question will be, to what extent did the European working class put up with this? But they're caught in the same two left-right divide we are. You know, like the German elections, the people in the AfD feel like Trump is their hero, and in part, and will buy, I believe, will buy the need, which Trump is saying, because Hegseth is saying it, and JD Vance supports it, is like Europe has to do its share. Europe has to build its military up. So people think about the right wing in Europe and in Germany as being anti-war, but Trump has already wooed them over very much. And I think he is going to help make the case that the European ruling class would make to its right wing, which is we're going to boost military spending. And like I said, conversely, on the left is going to say, well, we hate Trump, and we even hate Trump more than our own rulers. And we're going to have to give our rulers a pass where they build military spending because Europe has been abandoned by the United States. And so what are you going to do? So I actually think, as fucked as we are here in the United States in terms of workers being confused and caught into this Democrat-Republican thing, I think the identical thing is true in Europe. And so I think it looks very bad right now in terms of independent working class politics developing, let alone independent working class organization.
All right. Another grim episode.
Yeah. Oh, one last final thing that would really say that I have to rethink this. If Zelensky is killed in the next few weeks, or is moved out or pushed out, that would be the opposite of what I'm saying, because I really am saying that Zelensky his hand is being strengthened to be the war president in Ukraine by this event. So if Zelensky is pushed aside or cast out, then I'm wrong about that. But I'm saying that I believe he's been strengthened by this, not weakened.
All right, that does it for this week's episode. What's Left is a weekly political podcast channel challenging the mainstream left. We post information about our topics and our guests on the episode notes wherever you found this episode, or on our blog on Whatsleftpodcast.com. You can find past episodes to the podcast/channel there and connect with us. And I remind folks, if you like anything you've heard here, please subscribe, rate, review, turn on your notifications to any of our platforms on Spotify, iTunes, Podcast, BitChute, Odyssey, YouTube, Rumble, or Telegram. You can find our blog and any of those links in the episode notes wherever you found this episode. If you would like to give us feedback about something you've heard, or suggest something for us to cover, contact us through our blog. I'm Eduardo Varca with co-host Andy Lipson, and you can also find my social media handle as @DonEduardoVarca. And we thank you all for listening. Thank you, Andy, for redoing this. I know it was hard since you had to speak most of the time, and imagine not recording. So thank you.
My pleasure. It was a lot of fun.
All right. Ciao.
Take care.